So, um, who are we? Right. So, I was a bit of a fan of Terence McKenna for a while. For some strange reason, I can't bring myself to watch any more of them now. So a similar kind of feeling I had with Queen, the rock band a few years ago. It's like because I kind of they're so sort of close to me when I was growing up, and they meant so much to me, and so on. It became hard to listen to them again it was too nostalgic almost. But anyway, I'm past all that nonsense now. But I seem to be going through the same kind of thing with Terence McKenna because I mean the guy had a massive impact on me. I mean he kind of seemed to open up discourse that I thought was off limits really. I mean even some of my more kind of philosophical, scientific, or even perhaps mystical friends would just sort of frown upon some of this stuff and say the guy's a lunatic. He talks about machine elves. He concocted some sort of quasi sort of mathematical theory about novelty and trying to map it onto world history and all this kind of stuff, which does look a bit crazy to be honest. But um, the reason I mentioned him was that there was a really kind of cutting sort of bunch of questions he raised in one of his lectures, and I think he actually opened one of his or talks rather with these questions. He said, "Who are we? Where are we from? And where are we going?" Right? And I thought it might be cool to sort of just think about just sort of tackling one of those questions at a time. So, so who are we? I mean, what does that question really involve when you think about it, right? Because it's easy to say, well, we're sort of intelligent apes, upright apes, crawling around a rock in space, right? I mean, first of all, if you've listened to any of my other talks, there are a ton of sort of assumptions in there. And it just seems unsatisfactory because that's just an ostensible kind of account of who we are, right? And it doesn't really answer the deeper question that I'm sure we're all kind of aware of, really, which is, what is our purpose? And there's this kind of neo-Darwinistic interpretation of human behavior, which reads something like this. Essentially, it's the violent ape hypothesis that the reason we've had all these wars is because we're wicked, horrible, sort of nasty apes, right? Similar in kind and behavior to the chimpanzees, with of course we share 99% of their DNA, and so or vice versa, and that's held up as some kind of evidence for the fact that we're just like them. And sometimes they hunt monkeys, they kill and eat each other sometimes, I think. Apologies if I'm wrong about that, but I know that chimps can be pretty nasty, brutal, brutish creatures, right? And so, neo-Darwinism suggests that, conservatism, the capitalist market, and all this competitiveness and stuff makes sense, right? Because of that. So it's kind of okay to be nasty and selfish and greedy and so on, because that's just the way we do things, and that's what drives progress. There's this argument that war actually drives technological advancements. The army always get tech before us, possibly even meds that we, maybe. And well, certainly drugs. We know from sort of World War II that many of the soldiers were on amphetamines and so on and so forth. So, and loads of other examples of this. And that sort of seems pretty horrible. So, who are we? Okay, so I've had a couple of stabs at this. I'll square with you because I keep failing. To answer this question, I've been going on about sort of apes on a rock in space, and being an unsatisfactory sort of answer, and just sort of a bunch of facts and assumptions involved in all of that. And the one thing that we can say is that we are kind of existing beings that hurt and perceive the world, and we're here with others. And a lot of the meaning that's given to us is given to us through our dealings with others, our membership with various interest groups, sort of music, politics, religion, and so on. And that's really where we kind of, generally sort of locate our, our anchor. That's our anchor to the world in some sense, isn't it? Family, loyalty, um, things that hurt, right? Because that's what comes with loyalty, isn't it? It kind of exposes you to that other agent's sort of risks and issues, right? At the risk of sounding a bit sort of project managementy about this. But really, who are we? Sort of needs something even deeper than that, I would suggest. And for me, that is, what is just the fundamental nature of our actual being? Because I think if we had some more of an insight into that, we might better understand our sort of role in the world, in the universe, even in our own minds. Because let's face it, that's our first port of call when it comes to engagement with the world. Excuse me. Nothing out of mind has to date been experienced, right? It just, by definition, it simply cannot. So this is the realm in which we do our business. And that sort of seems creepy, in some sense to, set it down like that. Because it feels like we're in a world. We get on the bus, we get on planes and get off planes and travel and talk to other entities that are in this external world, right? So it feels as though the external world is somehow kind of primary and we are in that. But really, it only takes a little bit of reflection to see quite clearly that we've only ever been in this tunnel of sort of human experience. And that might have taken us to pyramids and beaches and discos and raves and concerts and so on and so forth. But we've always been in that same place, which is at the heart, the center of all of this stuff going on around us. And all of the friends and relatives and enemies and loved ones around us are having their own sort of person-centered experience of this. And so you might be tempted to say that, who are we? We are that, massive kind of gargantuan network of agents that travel through these kind of parallel tubes of experience. And sometimes those tubes of experience sort of intersect, bump into each other and bump away from each other, bump through each other, or sort of, to barely brush against each other, or maybe unnoticeably pass each other, or perhaps affect each other in ways that are unnoticeable, and so on and so forth. So, that seems to be what's going on, this kind of carpet. We're all kind of like a thread that's being woven slowly but surely through this fabric, or this foliating sort of fabric. To what end, though? Well, I mean, I suppose that answer kind of will differ for all of us, you could say. But that perhaps tells us something as well, doesn't it? It tells us that what we do have is a certain kind of freedom. Inviting Sapolsky to come along and explain why we don't, but a certain kind of freedom in the way that we sort of respond to these obviously, predetermined, but events which are essentially beyond our control. Shit that we can't control, right? Some extremely clever person once said that we can't change the weather, but we can set the sails, right? Okay, all right. So, I might keep some of these failed attempts and sort of maybe integrate them somehow within this talk. But this is so tricky, isn't it? Who are we? And I started blathering on about the sort of conscious agent thing. But I don't think anyone can really deny that. And so it might seem that in some sense we're kind of flogging a dead horse here, for want of a some nicer metaphor. But that's just true, isn't it? And I think I'll just restate what I'm saying, that what we are is a bunch of conscious agents, and the ones that we are sort of particularly sophisticated compared with some sort of nearby agents, according to our impression of as such. But it does look, for all intents and purposes, that as kind of meta agents, we've talked about this before, that we are kind of compound entities really that have agency within us, that manages kind of little local systems like a kidney, for example. And so the sound kind of emanating from this particular kind of meta agent is this voice. And remarkably, your minds, or our minds, even mine, because of course I can hear it back too, as I'm speaking it, in an unwitting way, I should say, that again, I think I've reported this elsewhere, that none of this is planned, so this is completely ad hoc, off the cuff, which probably may sort of degrade its quality in some ways. But the point I'm making is that I don't really know what I'm going to say next, and I think kind of Sam Harris points to this actually in his assessment of the notion of free will, when he kind of suggests that even our thoughts are just happening to us in some sense, right? And he's kind of onto something there, but that's another story, and it's a big old story, but it's an important one. And I tend to locate free will not within these kind of sort of sequential causal chains of sort of active inference and mechanical sort of explanations and so on. I tend to locate free will within a more sort of strategic setting. It's almost like the kind of the sort of war room. I touched on this the other day when I said that talked about the multiple Matthews involved in making a decision about the Taylor Swift tickets, right, and the kind of roller coaster emotional journey that turned into. And so that's how I see free will. It's not kind of in the weather blasting you into a bunch of rocks and so on. It's kind of how you rebuild the ship over a period of time after you've been blasted, right? And what you learn from that blasting, and whether you allow those kinds of blastings to blast you again. And whether you kind of steer the ship to sort of sunnier climes, according to the requirements of your ship, of course. This is your ship and no one else's. So, and I think it's kind of like the long, slow accumulation of kind of insights gleaned from particular experiences on that ship. That's where free will is. It's a long steer, right? I think in short-term situations, if you get into habitual behavioral routines according to certain hormonal sort of genetic predispositions, or situationally occurring things like so the one that Sapolsky mentioned, where, oh God, I wish I could remember the name of the condition. In fact, Paul Byrne's probably the guy to go to for this, because I think he watched every single one of Robert Sapolsky's lectures, and in some of them he talks about this particular, I think it's a genetic condition, right? And it only manifests in certain kind of situations, right? And so and suddenly, so husbands, I think it tends to afflict, and that there are these examples of these loving, sort of God-fearing churchgoers that love their families and wives and all this kind of stuff, that just suddenly sort of has something triggers them, and it kind of enables this gene that triggers certain mad behaviors, like they're just going to get on a plane, disappear, their families, they go missing and things like this, and they just have no interest in their loved ones anymore. And there's a whole host of things that can kind of trigger sort of immediate kind of biochemical responses that seem almost inescapable, which is why Sapolsky now sort of campaigns for better sentences, or 0 sentences for some of these, criminals caught up in the American justice system, because he's saying, well, there was no other way through that situation for them, and so on. So, but I challenge that, and maybe my thinking's a little bit woolly, and maybe there are kind of metaphysical reasons for some of it as well, of course, which we've touched on elsewhere. But I think that the thing that I'm trying to convey here is that our world is a mental world, right? And people, I don't think they get that. And I don't know why that is. And I think it's possibly to do with the kind of paradigm that we're kind of, for me, emerging from, slowly but surely emerging from the physicalist paradigm that kind of has us believe that we're kind of, clockwork entities with no meaning and soul and so on and so forth. And we've talked about illusionism, Dan Dennett's view of consciousness, which is, rest his soul, which is that it's just an illusion. And, I'm saying the exact opposite. I'm saying that the notion that we live in a sort of extended spatiotemporal domain, that's the illusion. And the one thing that is directly in your face, actual, visceral, phenomenological truth, undeniable truth, is that you're experiencing colors, tastes, feelings, emotions. Mark Soames would back this up and say, well, yes, it's like there is this reticular activating system that if we, flick that switch or deactivate it or something, consciousness will sort of disappear. But he's not saying that consciousness is actually located within that system, I don't think. Hence his dual aspect monism as opposed to physical. Come on, let's not pretend for a millisecond that I know exactly what these terms mean. But so what's real to us is feelings, right? And what does it take to have feelings? Consciousness. There needs to be this. Where are those feelings taking place? Well, what are the feelings affecting? They're affecting a conscious being, and that is me, and that is us. And of course, if you go along with some of my other metaphysics, that is all. That is the whole, right? So who are we? We are the inner sort of introspection of the cosmos, right? We are the cosmos experiencing itself. How about that? Is that deniable? Is that actually deniable? From any sort of metaphysical position, is that deniable? I'd say not. And if that is the case, let's just put those slippers on for one moment. Let's put the kind of idealist slippers on and say, well, everything is mental, and we know that is all we can be certain of, in a sort of Cartesian sense, and so it's foolhardy to suppose that there's anything else, right? And we've got the kind of private language argument kind of stuff about, no self without other, to give us some degree of certainty that other minds exist. We don't want to go the other way. So again, we go back to this kind of Twitterverse ontology and say, well, okay, there's just a bunch of conscious agents, and we don't know from the kind of information we get through these headsets precisely what we're really looking at. I know I'm kind of vision centric with this language and stuff, and I forgive me for that, but I don't want to get snagged on that stuff. We've got a good solid case for suggesting that agency goes all the way up and all the way down, right? And so therefore we've got a good case for suggesting that we're probably part of some sort of meta agency. And that means that we're probably in some way governed by this kind of, let's call it a sort of strategic layer, at least from our point of view, right? I mean, you might say that less complex agencies that support our metacognition are in the same sort of position that we are with respect to this higher level agency. And so, things like synchronicities, little coincidences, things that don't really kind of make sense to our kind of, spatiotemporal frame of reference, but nonetheless seem to guide a certain bunch of people or ideas towards a kind of concrescence that gives us a new development, right? So it's almost as though we're supporting some grand purposive volition, right? How am I doing here? I'm really not sure. But, my answer is to say, really, what I want to kind of like leap to, if only I was more like Nietzsche and just kind of did away with all the, the sort of nitpicking kind of analytical stuff and just get to where, I genuinely think we are, which is, stewards of nature, right? We're sort of, we are the introspection of the cosmos. We're trying to figure stuff out. The cosmos doesn't know any better than us. There is no grand kind of sort of Godhead, really, I don't think, that kind of orchestrates any of this. So this will please, perhaps, some of the atheists, all the, potentially even the materialists, because I'm not asserting that there's any kind of central command here, right? I don't think there is a Yahweh, right, or Jehovah. I think that there is just agency everywhere. I don't know why. That's a religious problem, I think, theological. But I do know that I'm here, and I do know that I exist, and I do know that my friends, family, and everybody else exists. And there does seem to be a move in recent times towards this less teleophobic way of thinking about things. I mean, crikey, 20 years ago, I would have just laughed in the face of anyone that said they believed in ghosts or UFOs or any of that stuff. And now I'm on record as saying that I'm perfectly happy to accept the sort of ontics, the reality of these things. Because, why should I stop? Why should I mistrust the accounts, the honest, emotional accounts of other human beings? Why should I mistrust that just because a bunch of dusty old textbooks from, years ago say, this stuff can't happen. The same reason that people like Rupert Sheldrake get, treated so poorly and ignorantly by the scientific establishment, who refuse to even look at his data in some cases. In spite of the fact that he understands the scientific method and knows how to do this stuff to actually, find significant data and so on and so forth. So look, I think I'm going to kind of stop this now because I'm quite tired. I've just come back from Prague where my daughter competed in the Dance World Cup. She did really, really well. Her team didn't win a particular prize, but I think England won the overall tournament. I haven't checked the latest results, but the chances of them not having done so are sort of, next to zero. So that's fun. Awesome. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope this made some sense. It's entirely possible it didn't. Have fun.